The other night, I was at this big family dinner, you know the kind. Way too much food, relatives you might see, twice a year.
Oh, yeah, I know those.
And my aunt, bless her heart, I swear she means well, but she started her, annual inspection going around the table, firing off questions like she's taking inventory.
The checklist patrol.
Totally. To my cousin Emily, it was still happy at that little startup, no plans for a real job. And then to my cousin Mark and his wife, oh, that house is lovely, but shouldn't you be thinking about, filling up those empty bedrooms soon?
Wow, subtle.
Right. She had this invisible scorecard out. And Mark, okay, he's got the mortgage, the stable corporate gig. He was clearly winning. Nods of approval all around. He even got a second helping of dessert.
The golden child for the evening.
Exactly. But Emily, who, by the way, just successfully launched her own business but is still single and renting, she got that look, the gentle pity look.
I know the look.
But here's the thing that really got me thinking. Later, I saw Mark outside. He was on the porch, on the phone with a friend. And this guy, the absolute model of success, 10 minutes earlier, he sounded trapped.
Really?
Yeah. Talking about his 80-hour work weeks, how he barely sees his wife, how he feels like he's just running on this treadmill he can't get off. And it just made me wonder, we are all sitting there judging our lives against this old scorecard that says you need this job by this age and this house by that age. But what if the person who looks like they're winning the game is actually losing?
That exact tension, that mismatch between the external scorecard and the internal reality, that's the perfect place to start this deep dive.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we are fundamentally living by a blueprint for a life that was designed decades ago. And it's a blueprint that just completely ignores the economic realities, the technological realities of today. It's this invisible kind of arbitrary timeline that hasn't just been, it's basically shattered.
Okay, so let's unpack that. We're diving into this idea of the social clock, that set of age expectations, and really exploring how the economic pressure, the precarity, combined with the pressure cooker of digital life, how that's forced a total rethink of what a successful life even looks like anymore.
Well, the term itself, social clock, it's actually got some history. It was coined by a psychologist, Bernice Newgarden, way back in the 1960s.
Okay.
And at its core, it's really just that invisible checklist society holds up, right? The expectation that major life events, big achievements, they should happen within a pretty narrow defined window. Like graduate by 22, have your career path sorted by 25, married with kids by 30, and then boom, comfortable retirement starting sharply at 65.
And I think we really need to pause on the context of that original clock.
Yeah.
Because it's so key to understanding why it feels almost, absurd now.
Exactly.
The 1960s, that was the era of linear careers, wasn't it? You joined a company, maybe you stayed there for 40 years, you got the defined benefit pension.
Right. Predictability was the name of the game.
Yeah, wage growth was more standardized. Inflation was, manageable compared to now. And the whole economic structure kind of supported a single income household being able to afford that detached suburban home. That was the cornerstone of the middle class dream.
Predictability. That is the key word. The old clock just assumed stable economic growth, reliable social mobility. You played by the rules, got the degree, worked hard. Those milestones felt attainable.
Yeah, there was a clearer path.
And that predictability, it just sort of dissolved, especially in the post-2008 world. So the core disconnect, the real problem, is that we're still trying to measure success using the 1960s ruler in, a 2020s economy. It doesn't fit.
You see that disconnect so clearly, I think, in the cost of those traditional milestones. Like buying a house, that used to be the way people built wealth, right? The main mechanism for wage earners to build equity.
Absolutely. It was the foundation.
But today, the staggering costs just to get into the housing market, especially in major cities, it's pushing the entire life timeline back. It makes those old milestones almost fundamentally incompatible with just modern urban life.
Precisely. And we can see it in the numbers. Look at, say, a major city like Toronto. It mirrors trends you see in New York, London, other big urban centers.
Okay.
The average age for a first-time home buyer, it's jumped from around 29 back in the 1980s to 36 today.
Wow, 36. That's a huge jump.
It's a 7-year gap. And that's enormous, right? These people are 7 years older before they can even start that traditional process of building wealth through property. So naturally, that delays other things, marriage, kids, long-term financial planning.
And it's not just the house prices themselves, is it? It's also the debt people are carrying into the market. Millennials, Gen Z, they are, on average, the most formally educated generations ever.
Yep, tons of degrees.
But they also entered the workforce during or right after major recessions, and they're carrying exponentially higher levels of debt. Student loan debt especially. We're talking amounts that often mean a decade, maybe more, of really high payments just to keep up.
And this is what we mean by the rise of economic precarity. It's instability as the norm. So you graduate with, say, 5 or even 6 figures of debt, and that traditional career ladder, it's often been replaced by the gig economy. Contract work, freelance roles, temporary jobs. Your income stream becomes really erratic.
Which makes saving consistently almost impossible.
Exactly. It prevents consistent saving. It makes you incredibly vulnerable to any kind of financial shock, a medical bill, car trouble. And it makes that idea of a stable 9 to 5 almost feel like a myth for a huge chunk of the highly educated workforce.
So that economic volatility, that instability, that's why those traditional milestones keep getting pushed back and why you see more young adults living with their parents for longer.
It's a direct consequence. The system isn't providing the stability the old clock assumed.
It's easy to frame this as a story of failure, isn't it? Like, oh, they just can't get it together. But I think it's more about a necessary, maybe even forced adaptation. We actually found a story that illustrates this perfectly. A guy named Liam, a young graphic designer in Toronto, trying to sort of measure up against his dad's timeline.
Right. Liam's story is fascinating. He works on a contract basis, classic gig economy hustle, right? And he lives in this modest, 500 square foot apartment. His parents, they bought their first suburban house when they were 26. For Liam, that idea is basically folklore.
It's just unimaginable now in a city like Toronto.
Completely. And he was meticulous. He set up this 5-year savings plan, really disciplined, aiming for a down payment. But here's the rub. Housing prices in Toronto were growing way faster than his salary or any interest he could earn on savings.
So the goalposts didn't just move.
They vanished. They just completely disappeared over the horizon. The target became unreachable through the means available to him.
And he told us, for a long time, he felt this constant, just gnawing sense of failure. He'd look around, see peers from university getting married, maybe moving way out of the city for quote-unquote affordable housing, landing stable corporate jobs. He was checking his life against that invisible scorecard, his aunt's scorecard.
Yeah.
And he just kept coming up short.
But here's where the really critical psychological shift happened for him. Liam started to realize that his quote-unquote unstable career, it actually gave him something his dad, who was tied to that pension and that fixed location, never had.
Which was?
Freedom. Geographical freedom, creative freedom. Last year, for instance, he managed to work remotely for a client based in Berlin for 3 whole months. He was soaking up European culture, building his international network, creating portfolio he could never have built if he was stuck in some rigid corporate structure back home.
So he had to redefine success for himself. It stopped being about owning property or having a pension.
Exactly. It became about, as he put it, a wealth of experiences. It became about creative control, flexibility. His struggle wasn't a personal failure. It was the system failing to provide the tools it promised. So he had to adapt. And in doing that, he ended up choosing a different quality of life, valuing freedom over equity in a way.
It's a powerful reframing. So the economic forces are dismantling the clock, forcing this precarity, which then forces us to redefine success. But the pressure, as you mentioned, it doesn't just come from the bank account. It comes from that digital mirror we're all staring into constantly.
Absolutely. If the economy shattered the clock, technology basically put the social pressure on hyperspeed, right? The social clock used to be enforced more locally. Your aunt at the dinner table, maybe your neighbors, your colleagues at work.
Yeah, your immediate circle.
No. That constant scroll on social media turns that societal pressure into this 24/7 internal anxiety loop. Suddenly, the curated expectations of literally a billion lives are instantly available for you to compare yourself against.
It turns the social clock into what one source called a self-imposed prison. That feels incredibly accurate. Social media isn't just a place to connect. It's fundamentally a comparison engine.
It really is. Filters, curated highlight reels, they create this pervasive illusion of perpetual perfection. The perfect body, the perfect relationship, the perfect job, the perfect vacation. It's always sunny, always successful.
And the weird thing is, we know it's curated, right? We logically know it's filtered, it's selected highlights, but it still gets to us.
That's the insidious part.
Right.
The illusion persists even when users are consciously aware that the content isn't the whole reality. It suggests the problem isn't just a lack of media literacy, it's tapping into a deeper psychological mechanism.
How so?
Well, our brains are kind of hardwired for social benchmarking. We figure out where we stand by looking at others. So when we see what appears to be flawless success or beauty online, our immediate, almost automatic response is comparison. The logic brain saying it's filtered often can't override that initial gut reaction.
And the psychological mechanisms here, they're just destructive. The research is pretty clear, isn't it? It's the activity of comparison itself that seems overwhelmingly bad for mental health. It links directly to anxiety, low self-esteem.
Oh, definitely. Look at the specifics. What psychologists call upward comparison. That's when you measure yourself against someone you perceive as, say, better looking or more successful.
Right.
That is consistently associated with lower body satisfaction, increased anxiety, feelings of inadequacy. You see a hyper-successful peer online, and your immediate thought is, wow, I'm such a failure.
But here's what I found really fascinating, and it just underscores how tricky social media is. Studies are showing that even downward comparison can have negative effects online.
Yeah, that's counterintuitive, isn't it? Because traditionally in psychology, observing someone less fortunate was sometimes thought to give you a temporary self-esteem boost, like, well, at least I'm not doing that badly.
Right, but not so much on social media.
Not consistently? No. Because the whole platform is built on performative success. So even if you find someone who seems less successful in one area, your brain quickly starts scanning for signs of their hidden success, or you start comparing other parts of your life to theirs. The mere act of scanning, judging, comparing it just drains your mental energy and locks you into this constant validation-seeking mode.
You're always measuring the difference.
Always measuring the difference. And that process itself is just exhausting and, frankly, demoralizing over time.
It feels like an anxiety economy. The business model itself often seems to capitalize on making us feel inadequate, right? Feed you images designed to trigger that comparison loop, keep you scrolling, keep you comparing, keep you engaging with the ads that promise to fix the inadequacy.
Absolutely. The digital social clock is always chiming in your pocket, reminding you what you should be doing or having according to this curated reality.
We saw this pressure really overwhelm someone in one of the stories we looked at, Maya. She was an NYU grad, had a respectable marketing job in the city. On paper, she looked fine.
Yeah, externally things seemed okay, but her internal reality was, tight budgets, long hours at work, and these relentless student loan payments hanging over her head.
And then she'd spend her evenings scrolling, seeing posts from old college friends who are documenting these elaborate, seemingly perpetual European vacations, or flashing new engagement rings, or boasting about landing six-figure jobs straight out of school.
Right, and her reality, eating instant ramen for dinner again, riding a crowded, late subway home, it just felt incredibly dull and inadequate compared to the digital social clock she was constantly checking.
And that internal pressure cooker, it just finally exploded on her. She described having a full-blown panic attack one morning on the subway, just this overwhelming dread that she was somehow fundamentally behind everyone else, that she'd wasted her expensive degree, wasted her youth.
That was her breaking point. And what did she do? She didn't try to compete harder. She just deactivated her accounts, cold turkey.
Which is huge. And the antidote for her, it wasn't getting a raise or finding a nicer apartment, although those things might have helped. The real antidote was disengaging from that external measuring stick.
Exactly. By logging off, she removed the constant toxic source of comparison, and she shifted her focus to developing what you might call an internal scoreboard. She stopped worrying about whether her life looked successful to strangers online.
And started focusing on what actually felt fulfilling to her.
Precisely. She rediscovered her love for painting something that gave her this deep intrinsic satisfaction, totally unrelated to money or status. She joined a running club, focused on hitting her own physical goals. She started mentoring a junior colleague at work, finding real value in contributing to someone else's growth.
So fulfillment for her was found when she just tuned out the external noise, the demands of that social clock amplified by the digital world.
She took ownership of her path again. She started defining success as internal peace, contribution, personal growth, not just compliance with some broadcasted, outdated timeline.
Maya's shift, moving from those external metrics to finding internal fulfillment, it actually seems to reflect a much bigger cultural change that's happening, especially among younger generations.
Oh, definitely. As those traditional markers of success, the big house in the suburbs, the fixed pension plan, as they've become either financially out of reach or just less attractive.
Yeah, maybe not even desirable for some.
Right. The millennial generation in particular seems to have fundamentally shifted its priorities. We're seeing much more of a maybe post-material focus.
What do you mean by post-material?
Well, previous generations were often characterized by material accumulation as the main goal. The bigger house, the fancier car, accumulating stuff. Millennials, broadly speaking, tend to prioritize experiences and maybe more ephemeral moments over just owning possessions.
So travel, learning new things, being present in the moment.
Exactly. Those are seen as valuable assets, maybe even more valuable than a mortgage in some ways, because they offer flexibility. And crucially, alongside that, they seem to be placing a really strong sense of social responsibility right at the center of their professional and their financial decisions.
That feels significant. It's not just a side issue. It's core to their value system.
It seems to be, yes. They're actively looking for jobs, making investments, choosing brands that align with their values, things like equality, social justice, environmental responsibility.
So they see their work, their spending, their investments as ways to make a difference, not just get ahead personally.
It's often framed that way, yes. They might view their purchasing power or investment choices as direct paths towards both self-actualization and contributing to systemic change. And they seem quite quick to call out companies or institutions whose actions don't line up with their stated values. They perceive it as inauthentic.
And does that value system then lead to maybe a distrust of the very institutions that upheld the old social clock, like big banks, traditional finance?
There's certainly evidence of that. Millennials came of age watching things like the Great Recession unfold. Many seem to view large banks and established financial institutions with a degree of skepticism, sometimes seeing them as part of the problem.
Right, the cause of the instability they inherited.
Perhaps. And this sense of disillusionment, it impacts everything. They often seem to prefer smaller, maybe more grassroots organizations or newer fintech solutions over those big monolithic financial giants. And this mistrust means that financial service providers, the whole industry really, has to fundamentally adapt if they want to serve this generation effectively.
So how does that change things like financial planning? If the old goal was just save for retirement at 65, what's the new focus?
Well, it shifts the focus dramatically. In the era of the old social clock, planning was mostly about accumulating capital for that distant fixed retirement date. Now, financial planning often has to address much more immediate, acute needs that come directly from that economic precarity and volatility we talked about.
Like managing the erratic income of a gig worker or dealing with that massive student debt load.
Exactly. Planners need to prioritize basic financial management, risk assessment, maybe insurance planning, figuring out the safety nets that the corporate world used to provide automatically. Advising someone on how to balance volatile contract income while managing high-interest debt is often far more pressing than optimizing a 401k contribution for 30 years down the line.
And you mentioned redefining milestones. We're seeing a total abandonment of the fixed retirement age too, aren't we? Planners are now being asked to support things like renting long-term instead of automatically pushing home ownership and this idea of progressive retirement.
Progressive retirement, yeah. It's a concept really born out of necessity, longer lifespans, and maybe a different view of work. Instead of that sharp cliff edge, stopping work completely at age 65.
Right, the gold watch and goodbye.
Individuals are planning to phase out work gradually, often over many years. It might look like, say, dropping to 4 days a week at 55, then maybe shifting to part-time consulting at 65, perhaps keeping a one-day-a-week project going until 75 or even later.
So it values continuous contribution, staying engaged, rather than that sudden cutoff.
Precisely. It focuses on contribution and intellectual engagement over adhering to an arbitrary retirement date.
And this need for continuous adaptation, for flexibility, it isn't just for young people starting out. It applies right across the board when that fixed social clock gets broken. Which brings us to another story, Kenji. He was someone who followed the old clock perfectly, meticulously, only to have it completely shatter on him mid-career.
Right. Kenji's story is really illustrative of this later life disruption. He was 48 years old, had been a loyal senior manager at the same electronics company for 20 solid years. His whole identity, his sense of security was all tied up in that very linear, predictable career path.
He'd hit the milestones, right? Stable salary, seniority, probably had a reasonable expectation of a decent pension down the line.
Exactly. He did everything right according to the old rules. But then the industry changed incredibly rapidly. New automation technologies came in, his entire division was basically rendered obsolete, and the company went through a major restructuring.
And that loyalty contract, security in exchange for long service. It was just broken.
Unilaterally broken. His life's timeline, the one he'd been following for 2 decades, just abruptly ended. No fault of his own.
Wow. For previous generations, that kind of midlife career displacement could have been catastrophic. It often meant maybe permanent underemployment or a huge step down in status and income.
It could have been. But Kenji adapted, and he demonstrated what's arguably the new essential survival skill: lifelong learning.
So he didn't just, take an early retirement package or despair?
No, he actively enrolled in reskilling programs. He focused on learning data analytics, cloud infrastructure skills that were in high demand in the new economy, and then he transitioned. He became a freelance consultant, leveraging his years of management experience alongside his newly acquired technical skills.
So his value proposition changed completely.
Completely. His value now isn't tied to his job title or his years of service at one company. It's tied to his continuous capability, his adaptability, his ability to contribute now. He's no longer senior manager Kenji from Company X. He's Kenji, the adaptable consultant, the lifelong student.
His story really drives home that point that education and career planning, they just can't be front-loaded anymore, can they? You can't just get your degree at 22 and expect it to carry you for 40 years.
Not in an age of potentially rampant job dislocation due to technological change like AI and automation. Continuous cyclical learning isn't a bonus anymore. It's becoming mandatory for career resilience.
Kenji's forced midlife pivot, his need to reskill, it really throws a spotlight on a massive flaw in the systems that were supposed to prepare us for that old, fixed 1960s timeline. Our education system, fundamentally, it's been governed by courses, credits, standardized tests for, over a century? And it relies almost entirely on time-based milestones.
Absolutely. The key concept is seat time. You are considered a 9th grader, for example, not necessarily because you've mastered 9th grade skills, but because you have spent a specific number of instructional minutes sitting in a specific classroom.
Right. The system is designed for batch processing, for cohort progression. It basically assumes that all students, regardless of their natural ability or maybe prior knowledge, they all need to spend the exact same amount of time covering the same material.
Which, when you think about it, is incredibly inefficient. It means students who grasp the material quickly are often bored, just waiting for the rest of the class. And students who need a bit more time or a different approach, they often get penalized, left behind, or labeled as failures.
So the system, as it stands, tells us very little about what students actually know or what they can genuinely do. It just tells us how long they sat in the chair.
Precisely. And this is why educational innovators are pushing so hard for something called competency-based education, or CBE. You can really see CBE as the necessary institutional response to this shattered social clock. It's trying to realign education with the reality of nonlinear lives and careers.
Okay, so CBE. What is it, fundamentally? How does it shift things?
Fundamentally, CBE shifts the focus entirely away from time-based milestones like grades, credits, seat time, towards learning-based milestones.
So moving from seat time to skill time, essentially.
That's a great way to put it. Students advance based on actually demonstrating mastery of very explicit, measurable, and transferable learning objectives or competencies. The goal is pretty profound. The system needs to adapt to the individual learner, not force the learner to adapt to the rigid system.
Which implies much more personalized learning.
It absolutely requires personalized learning, tailoring the experience to individual strengths, weaknesses, needs, interests. It often includes giving students more voice and choice in what they learn, how they learn it, when they learn it, and even where they learn it.
And it's not just about memorizing facts for a test, I assume.
No, not at all. The focus in good CDE is on higher order competencies. Things like the application and even the creation of knowledge, and developing those crucial cross-cutting skills that employers are screaming for, skills needed for these volatile 21st century jobs: critical thinking, collaboration, problem-solving, communication, having an academic mindset, learning how to learn.
So it's moving away from that artificial age-graded measure of success. Are you on track for your age? Towards demonstrated capability, can you actually perform the skill effectively?
Exactly. It aligns perfectly with the needs of a world where people like Kenji need to constantly reskill and demonstrate new capabilities throughout their lives, not just rely on a credential they got decades earlier.
Okay, it sounds honestly like a complete no-brainer. It makes so much sense for the world we live in now. And yet, the transition isn't exactly happening overnight, is it? Why is the institutional inertia just so enormous? What are the big roadblocks?
Well, you hit it on the head. Inertia. The old system is just so deeply entrenched. Think about it. Funding models, teacher contracts, assessment systems, textbooks, parental expectations. They're all built around the time-based model. Any change feels incredibly high risk.
And college admissions must be a huge factor, right?
Massive. College admissions departments still rely heavily on traditional metrics like GPA, class rank, specific course-taking patterns, all based on time spent and traditional grading. State accountability systems often reinforce those old expectations too. So if a high school decides to be innovative and switch to a pure CBE model where transcripts look different, maybe no traditional grades, just demonstrated competencies.
They risk their graduates being seen as weird or ineligible.
Potentially, yes. They risk their graduates being deemed ineligible for admission to certain state universities or highly selective colleges simply because their transcripts don't fit the old familiar boxes. It takes brave districts and understanding universities to make it work.
And wait, you mentioned something earlier about the NCAA still holding sway. How does college sports impact educational innovation? That seems bizarre.
It does seem bizarre, but the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, acts as a surprisingly large bottleneck for high school reform. They have eligibility rules for athletes that require demonstrating a certain number of seat time hours in core academic classes.
Seriously. Even if the student mastered the material faster.
Yes. If a student in a CBE system demonstrates mastery quickly and maybe moves on, having spent less physical time in that specific course, the NCAA can potentially penalize them, ruling them ineligible for college sports, even if they demonstrably know the material better than peers who just sat there longer.
That's counterproductive.
It's incredibly rigid. And that kind of external pressure from powerful organizations like the NCAA creates major barriers for high schools trying to implement more flexible mastery-based approaches like CBE.
Okay. Besides the system inertia and external pressures, the burden on the educators themselves must be immense too. You're asking teachers to completely change how they teach, how they assess, how they interact with every single student.
Absolutely. The shift to high-quality CBE isn't just tweaking lesson plans. It requires a profound transformation in pedagogy. Teachers need to provide much more ongoing, detailed, personalized feedback to every student. The goal isn't just getting a passing C grade anymore. It's ensuring every student achieves full mastery.
Which means moving away from that traditional success-failure culture.
Yes, moving towards a culture of revision, feedback, and eventually achieving mastery. It's a much more supportive but also more demanding model. And realistically, for a high school teacher who might see 150 students or more each day, providing that level of truly individualized support and feedback is simply not manageable at scale without fundamentally redesigning their workload, class sizes, and the support tools they have available.
And speaking of tools, the technology systems we currently use in most schools, the learning management systems, the LMSs, they weren't built for this kind of individualized, mastery-based approach either, were they?
Generally, no. Most current LMSs were designed for that batch processing model, delivering content to a whole group, tracking grades for a cohort that moves together. They often lack the really dynamic mastery tracking, the fine-grained content management, and crucially, the robust interoperability needed for a true CBE environment.
What do you mean by interoperability here?
Being able to pull data about a student's learning and demonstrated skills from different systems, maybe from an online course provider, a work-based learning experience, a traditional class, and combine it seamlessly to get a full picture of their competencies. You need a system that can track, say, 20 different students working on 20 different skills at 20 different paces, providing real-time feedback and customized resources based on their individual progress. Most current systems really struggle with that level of complexity and personalization.
Okay, so if the existing systems, the institutional inertia and the external pressures are all barriers, where does the path forward lie? How do we get to a place where CBE can be implemented effectively and skills can be validated in this new way? It feels like technology has to play a huge role.
It absolutely does. We're seeing really two major technological vectors emerging that hold enormous promise for solving both the personalization challenge and the verification or validation problem.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is machine learning, or ML, a branch of artificial intelligence. Over the next few years, ML is expected to dramatically improve adaptive learning platforms. The goal is to get them to the point where they can deliver something approaching the quality of one-on-one human tutoring, but deliver it at massive scale.
Wow, that would fundamentally change the teacher's role, wouldn't it? If the ML can handle the personalized content delivery and maybe initial skill practice.
Exactly. The human teacher can then shift their focus away from basic content delivery towards the things ML can't do well: mentoring, facilitating deeper discussions, coaching collaborative projects, focusing on those complex applications and essential soft skills. It frees up the human teacher for higher value interactions.
And can ML help with that interoperability problem you mentioned, tracking learning across different platforms?
Potentially, yes. ML can get much better at analyzing learner profiles and performance data from diverse environments, maybe a traditional classroom setting, an online MOOC, a career and technical learning simulation, even a workplace project. By aggregating and analyzing these disparate experiences, ML could help form a much more holistic and accurate assessment of a learner's actual competencies. That's crucial for someone like Kenji, the lifelong learner who's picking up skills in lots of different places.
Okay, so ML helps with personalization and maybe aggregating data. What's the second big technological factor?
The second one is blockchain credentialing. Now, this might sound very technical or like crypto hype.
Yeah, my eyes glaze over a bit when I hear blockchain sometimes. What's the practical implication here for someone just trying to prove they learned a skill, maybe outside of a traditional degree?
Think of blockchain in this context simply as a highly secure, essentially unchangeable and portable digital ledger for recording learning achievements. Instead of relying on a single university or a former employer to hold and verify your transcript or your certificate, which can be slow, cumbersome, or incomplete.
Right.
You, the individual, could eventually own and control a secure, instantly verifiable digital record of all your learning achievements. We're talking diplomas, degrees, but also micro-credentials for specific skills, professional certificates, maybe even verified artifacts of work you've done.
So instead of me having to request a paper transcript that might not capture that coding boot camp I did or that project management certification I got on the job, I could potentially present a secure digital portfolio of all my validated competencies, instantly verifiable through the blockchain.
That's the vision, precisely. It's about transforming credentialing from something institution-centric to something learner-centric. Pioneers in this space are already issuing secure digital certificates using open standards like BlockCerts.
Okay.
And this kind of system is tailor-made to support lifelong learning. It allows skills gained outside the traditional classroom, maybe through on-the-job training, online courses, verified volunteer work, apprenticeships to be formally assessed, verified, and added to your portable record. It helps fill that huge need for updated, dynamic graduate profiles in a world where job roles are constantly changing and skills need constant updating. It allows you to prove your capability, not just your time served in a particular institution. So if we try to synthesize this huge societal and institutional shift we've been discussing, the traditional social clock, the one that dictated those very specific age-graded milestones for a career, housing, family, it's essentially shattered. It just couldn't hold up under the immense weight of modern economic pressures.
Yeah, the precarity, the high debt, the absolute necessity now for continuous skill adaptation in a labor market that changes so fast.
Exactly. And the institutional response, which is still evolving but is definitely underway in education and finance and how we think about careers, it's this necessary pivot away from measuring progress based on time served towards measuring demonstrated mastery and capability.
It's preparing individuals, really, for a much more nonlinear life path, where success isn't about hitting fixed deadlines set decades ago, but about your capacity, your resilience, your ability to adapt.
And we see the millennial generation and increasingly Gen Z really driving this evolution in many ways by prioritizing that experiential value, that flexibility over just accumulating material things, by cultivating more of an internal scoreboard for fulfillment, one that consciously rejects the anxiety-fueled highlight wheels of the digital comparison culture.
That seems key. True fulfillment, like we saw in the stories of Liam, Maya, and even Kenji in his adaptation, it seems to be achieved when you consciously step outside that relentless comparison cycle. It's about cultivating a life path that's defined more by your own personal values, by embracing flexibility, by committing to lifelong learning. Regardless of when you happen to hit certain traditional milestones or if you hit them at all, the ultimate value maybe in all this chaotic transition is that we are collectively and individually starting to reclaim the measure of success for ourselves.
I think that's right. We are moving, perhaps slowly and unevenly, but definitely moving, into a world where the highest measure of success isn't about how quickly you cross some finish line that somebody else set for you generations ago. It's much more about the quality of the journey that you consciously design for yourself and the capabilities, the skills, the wisdom you acquire along that unique path.